My name is Nathan Reitinger, and I am thrilled to be talking with you today about our paper, Help Me Help You. This is a paper that's about privacy considerations for third-party IoT device repair, and we're very happy that it's at Pets. Imagine that you own a smart home device. This is not an unreasonable assumption because today it's estimated that, at least in places like North America, over 70% of the homes have one or more smart home devices. Maybe this is something like a coffee machine that you're using to remotely turn on or turn off, or maybe this is something as critical as your fridge. You're getting notifications on your phone that your fridge door is open, or perhaps you're having your fridge help you purchase things from Amazon that need replenishing. Well, what if this device breaks? What are you going to do? If you wanted to do this repair yourself, you'd quickly realize that these devices are incredibly complex. And to give you a context on how this is really an issue, we can look to the non-smart equivalent. So if something like your lamp breaks, there are very likely two culprits that can be causing the error. The first is that your light bulb may have run its course. So you just need a new light bulb. And most adults are pretty comfortable with giving a lamp a new light bulb. Or maybe the outlet itself isn't working. And again, this is something where you can probably find your circuit breaker and flip some switches and probably have power restored. But in the smart IoT device space, the issues are much more complex. Maybe you're having issues contacting your device because you're having app issues. Or maybe your Wi Fi is problematic. Maybe it's not a great signal strength, or maybe you just had some settings that changed. And so this isn't communicating correctly with the device either. Or perhaps you have lots of devices in your home. And so all of this device overlap and the communication overlap is also causing problems. If you have something like an electric toothbrush that's smart, maybe this isn't really an issue because you don't need the full functionality of the toothbrush to be fixed within 24 hours. But if you have a fridge, you do need the functionality of your fridge to be fixed in a very timely manner. And so my colleagues and I have considered this issue before, and we've thought about the need for something like an industry like the handy tech. So a handy tech is an idea that there is this technically skilled contractor, like a repair person, who can come to your home or perhaps help you remotely and debug these issues for you. Maybe they can help set up devices, or when your devices are broken, maybe they can help you fix those. This allows us to fix these broken devices, but it also presents very problematic privacy issues. Because these devices are increasingly entering intimate aspects of our home, whatever you have a handy tech come fix, they're going to be able to see and have access to that data. And so this presents people with a choice. Maybe you want to maintain your privacy and not have the handy tech come because you're worried about the intimate information that's on your device. Or maybe you're going to try and fix the device yourself because you're worried about a third party IoT device repair. Well, you're very likely to be voiding your warranty on the device if you do that. Or maybe it's a shared device in the first place, and so you probably shouldn't be messing with it. But on the other hand, if you have a handy tech fix your device, then you're allowing the handy tech to have access to what could be some of your most intimate secrets in the home. And so you are, in some sense, sacrificing your privacy. Well, we're interested in this question because it presents an opportunity to solve some of these problems now before we imagine that this handy tech industry will come around. So, for example, let's say we find out that transparency is something that makes people more comfortable with using a handy tech. That means that a developer can look at a smart home hub and figure out how it can gain transparency in that hub to give to users. Or perhaps access scope, reduced access scope, is something that participants found increases their willingness to use a hand tech. Then that means that a developer can look at how devices are accessed and how devices can be fixed and put additional, more granular access-based restrictions on that device. Finally, we look to industries like the auto mechanic industry, where there are certain laws that require transparency. So not just transparency because we want it, but a law that mandates transparency. And that allows you to have things like a required estimated cost of a repair so that you don't get in over your head. And because of all of the things that are happening behind the scenes of something like an auto repair fix, and that's similar to how a handy tech is doing things with devices that people are very unlikely to have awareness of, maybe we need those types of protections in the handy tech case too. And so we thought a licensing scheme would be a place that you could wrap up some of those protections. And so we're interested in if that increases the willingness to use a handy tech. This is what we call the work factors. This is one of our research questions. We were also interested in looking at whether certain devices with different privacy implications or urgency to fix, made it more likely that a participant would want to use a handy tech. And finally, we were interested in having a baseline understanding of who is going to be using the handy tech in the first place, demographic attributes of participants who are more willing to use the handy tech. We wrap these up into these three research questions: who's using a handy tech, how these factors impacted willingness, and how devices impacted willingness. And I'll talk about our findings briefly, but before that, I'll give you a preview of our vignette study, the methodology we used to address these research questions. So we used a vignette study, and we had participants randomly assigned into three different conditions of a speaker, refrigerator, and CPAP. These are all smart devices. We informed participants. We gave definitions of these devices. Most people are familiar with speakers and refrigerators. A CPAP is a machine that helps people sleep at night if you have a medical condition like sleep apnea. So we told the participant that they have this device and that one day they noticed that the device was not working. But they recently heard about this idea of a handy tech. And so the question is, which we use on a Likert scale, is the participant willing to use the handy tech to fix the device or not? We had help from YouGov to help administer this survey, which allowed us to make it nationally representative. And we also added in the factors that I mentioned before about access scope, transparency, and licensing. And I'll note here that we used a binary representation of these factors. So for access scope, we said either the handy tech has access to the device that's broken or all smart devices that are in the home on the smart hub. And we did this because we had a lot of conditions, and so we wanted to be broad rather than narrow, and we leave some of that narrow analysis for future work. We used a series of regressions to analyze these factors in terms of how they affected the willingness to use the handy tech. Our participants there were many participants, there were almost 5,000, and we had about 1,600 participants per device. And they were fairly evenly split in terms of gender, education, age, ethnicity, and income. We have further demographic variables that we note in the paper. So I'll talk about each of these findings, and I'll walk through each of them in some of the high level points. First, who is going to be using the handy tech? Well, we found statistically significant results that younger people, people with children, and people who owned more smart devices were more willing to use the handy tech. Turning to how the factors impacted willingness, these were the licensing, transparency, and access scope. We found that access scope and transparency had a statistically significant effect on willingness using handy tech, but licensing did not. So access scope means that if you have more access, then you're less willing to use the handy tech. And if you have more transparency, then you're more willing to use the handy tech. Again, I mentioned that these are binary representations of these factors. So we think that future work could look into licensing and probably find some interesting results there, even if we didn't show that in our study. The last finding related to the device's privacy implications or urgent to fix. So we didn't pick these devices randomly. We were very intentional about picking devices based on a literature review that we knew the devices had a higher likelihood of being privacy sensitive or a higher urgency to fix. So a CPAP machine is a medical device, very private, and a speaker is potentially private, depending on what types of things you use the speaker for. But a fridge is less likely to be private. But urgency to fix, a fridge is high and a CPAP is also high. So when we look at how these devices impact the willingness to use a handy tech, and in terms of urgency, we found a pretty sensible result here. So if a device is considered more urgent to fix by a participant, after the willingness question, we asked the participant how they felt about the device in terms of its urgency to fix. We also asked privacy. If the device was more urgent to fix, then participants are more likely to use a handy tech to fix it. And that occurred for all three of the devices. However, if we look at how privacy affects this consideration, we did not find a statistically significant result. So it seems that while urgency is highly related to willingness to use the handy tech, privacy is less related, which was something that confused us. And so we wanted to look into this further. And here we looked to individual, so participants themselves, their privacy perceptions. We used a series of questions from prior work that essentially looked at how people are thinking about these smart devices, the data on these devices, the potential security breaches on these devices, and whether there could be tracking between these devices. And then we use this to come up with how people had either high privacy concerns or low privacy concerns. And when we take that understanding and map it onto the willingness to use the handy tech, we do notice that there's a difference. So if you have more privacy concern about the smart home devices, then you're less willing to use the handy tech. And if you have less privacy concern, then you're more willing to use the handy tech. So in summary, some people are going to use the handy tech, but urgency and privacy are fairly complex topics. So if a participant feels that a device is urgent to fix, they're very likely to fix that device. But if they feel the device is potentially privacy sensitive, then it's more of a mixed bag. And what this means is that there's even more reason to look into these technical factors that we showed were able to increase the willingness to use the handy tech, like reducing access scope of a third-party repair and increasing transparency. So we're very happy to have you listen to this talk, and I am going to sit around for questions. Thank you.